Most people think they know what Alaska is. A cold place, a big place, somewhere remote, somewhere extreme, somewhere they'll visit someday but probably never will. They're wrong about all of it. Alaska is not just the largest state in America. It is larger than Texas, California, and Montana combined. It holds 17 of the 20 highest peaks in North America, 100,000 glaciers, and fewer people than the city of Tucson, Arizona. This is a place where grizzly bears outnumber humans in entire counties, where the sun doesn't set for 80 days in summer, where wilderness doesn't end at the edge of a national park. It goes on and on and on until the concept of edge stops making sense entirely. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a mountain so large it creates its own weather. So tall, it can be seen from 200 miles away. So powerful, it has killed over 100 climbers and humbled every single person who has ever stood at its base. This is what we're here for today. This is Alaska. And if you've ever felt like the world was running out of places that still feel genuinely wild, what you're about to see is going to change that. Stay with me. Let's start with the scale, because if you don't understand the scale, you don't understand anything else about this place. Alaska is not just big. Big is the wrong word entirely. Alaska is a different category of existence. 663,000 square miles of land. To put that in perspective, Alaska is larger than Texas, California, and Montana combined. If you cut Alaska in half and gave each half to the continental United States, Texas would become the third largest state. Alaska has more coastline, more than 33,000 miles of it, than the entire lower 48 states put together. It contains 17 of the 20 highest mountain peaks in all of North America. It holds over 3 million lakes, 100,000 glaciers, and more active volcanoes than the rest of the United States combined. And it is home to fewer people than the city of Tucson, Arizona. 630,000 people. In all of that, let that sit for a moment. What that means in practice, what it actually feels like on the ground, is that you can drive for 4 hours and see nothing. Not a gas station, not a cell tower, not another vehicle, just road and mountain and sky, and the particular kind of loneliness that stops being loneliness after about 30 minutes and starts becoming something else entirely. Something that feels unexpectedly like freedom. But freedom with teeth. Alaska doesn't have a safety net. It has terrain, and the terrain is always winning. The story of Alaska begins long before America had anything to do with it. Long before Russia, for that matter. For at least 15,000 years, and some archaeologists now believe much longer than that, the indigenous peoples of this land lived here, moved through here, built lives here that were far more sophisticated and far more adapted to this environment than anything that came after. The Athabascans in the vast interior forests, hunters, fishermen, masters of a boreal landscape that would kill most outsiders within days. The Yup'ik and the Inupiaq along the western coast, where the Bering Sea is violent and cold and generous in equal measure, and where survival depended on reading weather, current, and ice with a precision that no instrument has ever matched. The Inupiaq in the far north, in the Arctic, a place so extreme that the word inhospitable barely begins to describe it. Building cultures of extraordinary richness and resilience in conditions that most of the world considers uninhabitable. The Tlingit, the Haida, and the Tsimshian in the southeast, seafarers and traders and artists of extraordinary skill, whose totem poles and clan houses and carved canoes represent one of the great artistic traditions of the pre-Columbian world. These were not people who endured this land. They did not merely survive it. They thrived in it. They understood it on a level that is genuinely difficult for the modern mind to comprehend. They knew which plants healed which injuries. They knew how to navigate hundreds of miles of open ocean by the stars, by currents, by the behavior of birds. They knew how to read the ice, how to tell from the color, the sound, the texture of frozen water, whether it would hold a sled, a person, a whole village on the move. That knowledge took tens of thousands of years to accumulate, and much of it is still here, passed down generation to generation, through stories told in winter when the dark lasted 20 hours and the only light came from fire. Then, in 1741, a Danish explorer named Vitus Bering, sailing in service of the Russian Empire, made landfall on the Alaskan coast, and the world that had existed here for 15 millennia began to change. Russia claimed the territory, built trading outposts along the coast, sent hunters who took sea otters so aggressively, so relentlessly, that populations that had existed for millions of years were brought to the edge of extinction within decades. The Russian-American company, essentially a private corporation, granted control of an entire territory operated here for nearly 100 years. And then, in 1867, the Russian Empire decided that Alaska was more trouble than it was worth. Too remote, too expensive to defend, too far from St. Petersburg to matter. And so Tsar Alexander II agreed to sell it to the United States for $7.2 million, 2 cents an acre. The American public was not impressed. Newspapers mocked the purchase. Critics called it Seward's folly after Secretary of State William Seward, who had negotiated the deal with genuine enthusiasm. A frozen wasteland, they said. Wall Russia, some called it. A useless, icebound, worthless acquisition. And then gold. In 1896, gold was discovered in the Klondike region, just across the border in Canada, and a wave of 100,000 prospectors descended on the north. They came through Alaska, they built towns almost overnight, they froze, they starved, they struck it rich, they lost everything. The gold rush didn't just bring money. It brought infrastructure, roads, ports, telegraph lines, a reason, finally, for America to pay attention to what it had bought. And then, decades later, oil. In 1968, one of the largest oil fields ever discovered in North America was found at Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's Arctic coast. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline, 800 miles long, crossing 3 mountain ranges, dozens of rivers, and some of the most challenging terrain on the continent, was built to carry it south. It took 3 years and 30,000 workers to construct. It has been carrying oil ever since. 2 cents an acre. History's greatest bargain. Or, depending on who you ask and what you value, history's most complicated one. If this is the kind of storytelling you came here for, the real history, the real scale, the places that actually matter, subscribe to Rome Folios right now. This is what we do. Every week, a new place the world forgot to look at. Most people who come to Alaska enter through Anchorage, and it surprises them. They expect a frontier outpost, a rough collection of buildings at the edge of the known world. What they find is a real city, nearly 300,000 people. Coffee shops, traffic, a performing arts center, a surprisingly good restaurant scene built on halibut and king crab and produce flown in from the south. A skyline, but Look past the skyline, look just past it, any direction, and the wilderness is already there. Not as a backdrop, not as scenery, as a presence. Moose wander through suburban backyards here with a casual confidence that takes a moment to process. These are not small animals. A bull moose stands 6 feet tall at the shoulder and can weigh 1,500 pounds. They walk through school parking lots. They stand in the middle of major roads and decline to move. Brown bears have been spotted on hiking trails minutes from downtown. Beluga whales feed in the inlet, visible from the international airport. Bald eagles, the national symbol, everywhere in the lower 48, reduced to a carefully managed population circle overhead in Anchorage like pigeons. This is not a city that exists alongside wilderness. This is a city that exists inside it. And on a clear day, which is not every day, not even most days, but when it comes, it is worth every cloudy one you waded through. The Alaska Range rises to the north in a wall of white so enormous, so impossibly high, that it stops you mid-sentence. You are standing in a coffee shop. You are having a perfectly ordinary morning. And then someone says, "Look, north." And there it is, 130 miles away, visible on a clear day with extraordinary clarity. A mountain so large it generates its own weather systems. A mountain that is, by some measures, the tallest on Earth, not from sea level, but from base to summit, rising over 18,000 feet from the surrounding terrain. Denali. We will come back to Denali, but first leave Anchorage. Drive south, because one of the great free experiences in Alaska is already waiting for you, and most visitors drive past it without fully understanding what they're seeing. The Seward Highway hugs the shore of Turnagain Arm, a long, narrow inlet extending east from Cook Inlet for about 50 miles before turning south toward the Kenai Peninsula. On one side, the water. On the other, mountains rising almost vertically from the road. The drive takes about an hour. In that hour, you will see more geology, more wildlife, and more raw natural drama than most people encounter in a week of national park hopping. Turnagain Arm is one of the places on Earth with the highest tidal range, up to 40 feet between low and high tide. When the tide rushes back in, it comes not as a gradual rise, but as a board tide, a wall of water moving at up to 30 miles an hour, churning, opaque, audible from the shore. Tourists who have walked out onto the exposed mudflats at low tide, attracted by what looks like sand, have found themselves unable to move. The glacial silt grips like concrete. The tide comes in. People have died here. Not from violence, not from cold, not from any dramatic Alaskan threat, from underestimating a tidal flat. Alaska teaches that lesson in many ways. Above the highway, on the near vertical faces of the mountains, Dall sheep, white, perfectly camouflaged against the snow above and the rock below, pick their way along ledges that look, from the road, like they offer no footing at all. These animals live where nothing else can follow them. Predators cannot reach them. Hunters struggle to reach them. They have found safety in altitude, in impossibility, in the willingness to go where comfort ends. There is something Alaskan about that. Nothing, and I want to be precise about this, because I've traveled widely and I've used the word incredible. In too many countries, nothing prepares you for Denali. The mountain has many names. The Athabascan people called it Denali, a word that translates, approximately, as the High One. For nearly a century, American maps listed it as Mount McKinley, named after a president from Ohio who never visited Alaska, never expressed particular interest in Alaska, and had no connection to this mountain whatsoever beyond the enthusiasm of a gold prospector who wanted to honor the then candidate during the rush of 1,896. In 2015, the Obama administration restored the mountain's original name, Denali. It is 20,310 feet above sea level, the highest peak in North America, the third highest of the 7 summits, the highest mountains on each continent. But the number, as I said, doesn't capture it. What captures it or comes closest is this. The visitor center in Denali National Park sits at roughly 2,000 feet above sea level. The summit of Denali is 20,310 feet above sea level. Standing at that visitor center on a clear day, looking up at the mountain, you are looking at something that rises another 18,000 feet above you. That is 3.5 miles of vertical air between you and the top. 3.5 miles. Straight up. Most mountains you encounter from below look tall. Denali looks like a different category of object entirely. Like a wall. Like something that should not exist in a world scaled for human beings. The mountain creates its own weather. Storm systems develop around it that bear no relationship to what's happening anywhere else in the region. Temperatures on the upper slopes can drop to minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chill conditions comparable to the surface of Mars. Every year, between 1,000 and 1,200 climbers attempt the summit. The most common route the West Buttress takes between 17 and 21 days in good conditions. In bad conditions, climbers wait in their tents for days, pinned down by winds that make movement impossible and visibility zero. Roughly 50% of those who attempt the summit reach it. The other half turn back. Over the history of the mountain's documented climbing record, more than 100 people have died on its slopes. Some fell, some were struck by avalanches. Some were caught by storms they couldn't escape, some simply disappeared. The mountain keeps score. And yet, on a clear day, a rare, precious, genuinely uncommon clear day in Denali National Park, the mountain is the most beautiful thing I have encountered in years of traveling this planet. I don't say that lightly. I've stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon at sunrise. I've watched the sun come up over Angkor Wat. I've seen the Sahara from the air and Patagonia in storm. Denali is different. It is not beautiful in a way that photographs can hold. Every photographer who has seriously attempted to capture this mountain will tell you the same thing. The images are always smaller than the reality. The lens compresses distances, flattens depth, reduces 18,000 feet of vertical air to something that fits on a screen. You have to be here. You have to stand in the cold, on the tundra, with the wind coming off the snowfields above, and look up. And let the scale do what scale does. Reorder your sense of what is large and what is small, what matters and what doesn't, how long a human life actually is against the age of what you're looking at. Denali is 60 million years old. It has been this height, roughly this height, for about 6 million years. Your entire civilization, your entire species, is a rounding error in that timeline. The tundra that surrounds the mountain in every direction is unlike any landscape most Americans have encountered. In summer, it erupts in color. Deep, saturated, almost aggressive color red bearberry and crowberry, gold sedge grass, amber lichen on gray boulder fields, occasional patches of deep green spruce at lower elevations. The whole valley floor looks painted. And moving through it, unhurried, indifferent to your presence, the wildlife of interior Alaska goes about its business. Grizzly bears cross the tundra with a rolling, muscular gait that covers ground faster than it looks. They are everywhere in this park. On your first day, you may see one from a distance and feel appropriately thrilled. By your third day, you will see them closer, and the thrill will have become something more complex, a mix of awe and deep, instinctive awareness that you are not at the top of the food chain here. Caribou move in groups across the high ridgelines, their antlers visible against the sky. Dall sheep pick their way across the high faces of the mountains. Moose stand in shallow ponds, submerging their entire heads to pull up aquatic plants, unbothered by the buses that stop to watch them. Ptarmigan, small, round, perfectly camouflaged birds that turn white in winter, scatter from the road in front of the bus like leaves. Arctic ground squirrels stand upright on their hind legs outside their burrows, watching everything with an alertness that suggests they know perfectly well what lives out here and want to be ready. And then, if you are lucky, if you are patient, if you have been quiet and attentive and the conditions are right, a wolf, gray or black or tawny, moving along the edge of the road in the early morning light, pausing for a moment to look at the bus, at the people inside, with an expression that reads as neither fear nor aggression, but simply assessment. You are noted. You are not a threat. You are not prey. You are something the wolf has no particular category for. It looks at you for perhaps 5 seconds. Then it walks into the brush and disappears. And the bus stays still for a long moment after. Because no one can think of anything to say. There is one road into Denali National Park, 92 miles long. Private vehicles are allowed for the first 15 miles only. Beyond that bus only. The decision was made decades ago to limit vehicle access in order to protect the ecosystem, to preserve the quiet, to prevent the park from becoming what so many American wilderness areas have become, accessible to millions, but changed fundamentally by that access. On that bus, hours from the entrance, miles from the nearest building, the driver cuts the engine, and Denali National Park breathes. You hear wind moving across the tundra. You hear a creek somewhere below, moving over stones. You hear a raven calling from a ridgeline above. And then if everyone on the bus is still enough, if the raven stops, if the wind pauses, nothing, absolute nothing. The kind of silence that exists in very few places on Earth anymore. The kind of silence that has a texture, a temperature, a specific quality that you can feel in your chest. Alaska still has it, in vast, uninterrupted quantities. The question is, how much longer? If this is the kind of travel content you come to YouTube for, real places, real depth, no filters, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week, Roam Folios takes you somewhere the world forgot to look. You don't want to miss where we're going next. Leave the mountains. Drive south and east. And Alaska shows you an entirely different face. The Kenai Peninsula reaches into the Gulf of Alaska like a blade, mountains on its spine, glaciers on its shoulders, fishing towns clinging to its edges. This is where glaciers meet the ocean in a confrontation that has been going on for millions of years, and that is, right now, changing faster than at any point in recorded history. Exit Glacier in Kenai Fjords National Park is one of the most accessible glaciers in the state. A short walk from the parking area brings you to its face, and that face stops you, not because of its size, though it is large. Not because of the sound, though the creak and pop of ice under pressure is constant and deeply strange. Because of the color. Glacial ice, compressed over thousands of years under the weight of its own accumulated mass, absorbs all wavelengths of light except blue. The blue that comes back at you from the face of Exit Glacier is a color that exists nowhere else in nature. Not the blue of sky, not the blue of deep ocean. Something denser, older, more saturated. The color of time, compressed and made visible. You want to stand in front of it for a long time, and then you turn around, and you look at the signs along the hiking path behind you. Wooden posts placed at intervals up the valley, each one marked with a year. This is where the glacier's edge stood in 1951. This is where it stood in 1979, in 1995, in 2005, in 2015. Each marker is further from the ice than the last, by a lot. The retreat is not measured in feet. It is measured in hundreds of yards, in miles over the longer timeline. The valley behind you is bare rock, scraped, clean, polished, smooth, still raw and new looking, the mark of ice that was here until recently and is now gone. Alaska is one of the fastest warming regions on the planet. Temperatures in the state have risen by more than 3 degrees Fahrenheit over the past 50 years, roughly twice the global average. The permafrost frozen ground that underlies much of the state, that buildings and roads are built on, that entire ecosystems depend on, is thawing. In some areas, the ground is literally subsiding as the ice within it melts. Buildings tilt, roads buckle. Forests of trees that have stood for a century are toppling as the ground beneath them loses its integrity. The Inupiaq communities of the far north villages that have existed on the Arctic coast for thousands of years are watching the sea ice that protected their shores from storm surge disappear. Some of these villages are now planning to move entirely, to relocate whole communities at enormous cost and with profound cultural disruption because the land their ancestors built on is no longer stable enough to stand on. The glaciers are the most visible sign, but the glaciers are not even close to the whole story. Further east along the coast, Valdez, a small port town at the head of a fjord so dramatic it looks designed. Mountains on 3 sides, rising almost vertically from the water. Snow on the peaks even in August. The harbor below, busy with fishing boats, tour vessels, and the occasional barge supplying the communities further up the coast. It looks like Switzerland. If Switzerland had brown bears wandering the edge of town and king salmon running in the river that flows through the center of it, Valdez is a place of unusual beauty. It is also a place of one of the most significant environmental disasters in American history. On the 24th of March 1989, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez ran aground on Bligh Reef in Prince William Sound, about 25 miles from this harbor. The reef was clearly marked on charts. The third mate, who was at the helm, was not licensed to navigate those waters. The captain was reportedly below deck. It took less than 3 hours for the situation to become a catastrophe. 11 million gallons of North Slope crude oil poured into Prince William Sound. Eventually, 1,300 miles of coastline were contaminated. 28% of the harbor seals in the sound died. 250,000 seabirds, thousands of sea otters, 2 populations of killer whales in the sound have never fully recovered. The herring fishery, which sustained commercial fishing operations for generations, collapsed a few years after the spill and has not recovered in 35 years. The response was massive. 11,000 workers, 1,500 boats, cleanup operations for 4 summers. Beaches were steam cleaned. Rock was turned and turned again. The visible oil eventually disappeared. The sound looks clean today. Sea otters float on their backs in the harbor, cracking shellfish on their chests. Humpback whales surface in the fjords. Bald eagles perch on every pier. But under the surface of the sand on some of those beaches, scientists have found oil that is still liquid, still toxic, still present, 35 years later. Standing on the dock in Valdez today, watching the light on the water, watching a sea otter navigate the harbor with elegant unhurriedness, it is very hard to hold both realities at once. The beauty of what's here, and the knowledge of what was lost, and what may never come back. Alaska makes you do this constantly. Hold 2 things at once, the sublime and the scarred, the ancient and the endangered, the wild and the wounded. That is not a contradiction you can resolve. It is the truth of this place. To understand Alaska, to really understand it, beyond the landscapes and the wildlife and the dramatic history, you have to spend time with the people who live here year-round. Not the tourists who come for the summer. Not the seasonal workers who arrive in May and leave in September. The ones who stay. Through the winter, when temperatures in the interior drop to -50 and the days shrink to 4 hours of pale, gray light, and the nearest large city is 1,000 miles away, and the silence is so complete it can start to feel, if you're not prepared for it, like a kind of pressure. Those people are a specific kind of human being, and being around them, even briefly, recalibrates something in your sense of what ordinary life can look like. Self-sufficiency is not a lifestyle choice for Alaska's year-round residents. It is an operational requirement. The population of the state is so spread across such vast distances that the concept of nearby simply doesn't apply in the way it does anywhere else in America. Villages of 200, 300, 500 people accessible in winter only by air or by snowmobile along frozen rivers are not remote outposts on the edge of civilization. They are communities, real communities, with schools and churches and local governments and disputes about zoning and debates about the future. They just happen to be places where, if the supply plane doesn't come for 2 weeks because of weather, you eat what you have. Where, if there is a medical emergency, you keep the patient alive until the medevac arrives, because the medevac might be hours away. Where your freezer is not a convenience but a survival strategy stocked in fall, with moose, salmon, caribou, halibut to carry you through a winter that can last 7 months. Alaska has, per capita, more licensed pilots than any other state in America. Not by a small margin, by a massive one. Because in much of this state, there are no roads. The float plane is the school bus. The float plane is the mail carrier. The float plane is the ambulance. For the communities of Western Alaska, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, the Arctic coast, the small plane is not a convenience or a luxury. It is the only connection between a community and the rest of the world. Bush pilots in Alaska occupy a cultural position that is hard to explain to anyone who hasn't spent time here. They are known by name, trusted with everything. The logistics of their routes, what they carry, when they fly, what weather they can push through, and what they can't affect the daily lives of thousands of people. They fly in conditions that would ground aircraft anywhere else. Zero visibility, whiteout conditions, mountain passes that are navigated by memory when the clouds sit too low for visual reference. They are, in a very direct sense, the circulatory system of rural Alaska. And then there are the Alaska Native communities, the ones who have been here the longest, whose relationship to this land is not tourism or industry or even residence in the conventional sense, but something more ancient, more reciprocal, more deeply embedded in the landscape itself. The Yup'ik of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, the Inupiaq of the Arctic coast, the Athabascans of the interior, the Tlingit and Haida of the southeast. These communities have absorbed 2 centuries of disruption, colonization, forced relocation, boarding schools designed to sever children from their languages and traditions, economic pressures that pulled people toward urban centers, and they are still here. The languages, many of them are endangered, but they are not dead. Elders still speak them. Young people are learning them in language nests, in immersion programs, in deliberate, determined efforts to recover what was nearly taken. The traditional knowledge, the seasonal knowledge, the ecological knowledge, the navigational knowledge, accumulated over 15,000 years of living in this specific landscape, is still being passed down. Slowly, imperfectly, against the pressure of a world that keeps offering easier alternatives. But it is being passed down. A woman in a Yup'ik village in the Yukon Delta sewing a parka from materials she has prepared herself, the fur treated in the traditional way, The stitching designed to be waterproof and windproof in conditions that would destroy any synthetic alternative is not performing culture for visitors. She is practicing a technology refined over thousands of years to do one very specific and very important thing: keep a human being alive in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. That knowledge deserves the word sophisticated. It deserves the word advanced. It deserves more than the word traditional usually implies when we use it, which is to say something past, something historical, something that has been superseded. It has not been superseded. It works better in this specific environment than almost anything that has come to replace it. Alaska changes you. Not immediately. Not with a single dramatic moment, though there are dramatic moments here in abundance. It does it slowly, over days, over the accumulation of miles and silences and encounters with a world that is genuinely indifferent to your presence. You start to feel small, and then surprisingly, gradually, in a way you don't expect, that starts to feel good. In a world that asks you to be the center of everything, to document everything, to optimize every experience and share every moment and perform your life for an audience that may or may not be paying attention, Alaska asks nothing of you. It was here before you arrived. It will be here after you leave. Your presence is registered, perhaps, by the bears and the ravens and the wolves, noted, assessed, filed under, not a threat, not of interest, and then forgotten. Your job here, if you are paying attention, is simply to witness, to be present for the light at 2 a.m. in midsummer, when the sun has barely set and the sky is the color of a bruise fading to gold. To stand at the edge of a glacial lake and watch ice calve from a face a mile wide into water so cold it steams. To wait quietly on a riverbank in September while sockeye salmon red as traffic lights, driven by a compulsion that has nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the perpetuation of life, move upstream, past your feet, in numbers that don't seem possible. To hear a wolf howl in the middle of the night, in a forest where no artificial light has ever been turned on, and feel the sound move through your body in a way that bypasses thought entirely and speaks directly to something much older. To look up on a clear night in winter north of Fairbanks and see the aurora. Green first, then violet, then white. Curtains of light moving across the sky with a slow, liquid quality, not like light behaves anywhere else, not like anything you've seen or imagined. Moving, folding, flaring, dimming, brightening again. Scientists will tell you it is charged particles from the solar wind interacting with gases in the upper atmosphere. That is true. It is also completely inadequate as a description of what it feels like to stand under it. People cry, seeing it for the first time, not from sadness. From the particular overwhelm that comes when reality exceeds expectations so completely that the body doesn't know what else to do. That is Alaska's real gift. Not the landscapes, though the landscapes are among the most extraordinary on Earth. Not the wildlife, though the wildlife is beyond anything most people will encounter in a lifetime of travel elsewhere. The gift is the perspective. The gift is the reminder, urgent, physical, impossible to look away from, that the world is ancient. That wilderness is not a backdrop for human activity, that we are, in the longest view, visitors here, and that being reminded of that here, in this specific, irreplaceable, extraordinary place, is the most alive most people will ever feel. Alaska is 3 times the size of Texas. It contains more active glaciers than the rest of the inhabited world combined. More coastline than every other American state put together. It is a place where the sun does not set for 80 days in summer and barely rises for 60 in winter, where the wildlife outnumbers the people by orders of magnitude, where the land still, quietly, persistently is winning. There are places on this planet that exist on their own terms, that do not perform for visitors, that do not soften their edges or adjust their rhythms to accommodate the human desire for comfort. Alaska is one of those places, maybe the last great one in America, the last frontier. It still deserves that name. Go if you can. Go before the glaciers are smaller than they already are. Go before the permafrost finishes its long, slow melt. Go while the wolves still run in Denali and the salmon still darken the rivers in September and the aurora still moves across the winter sky in colors that don't have names. Go while it's still this. If this video moves something in, you share it with someone who needs to see the world this way. Subscribe to Roam Folios if you haven't already. We go deep on the places that still have something real left to say. And leave a comment below, would you spend a winter in Alaska? I want to know. I'll see you in the next one.